All right, so you just had lunch, and you probably have that big ball of food sitting in your stomach, and I know what that means, which is this is going to be the hardest session of the day. And so it's okay, I'm sympathetic, I know exactly how you feel, I know what it's like to have to listen to a presentation when you're all, relaxed and, calm, and your body's processing that food. So here's the deal that we're gonna strike here, okay? If I see you getting fatigued, okay, and I see your eyelashes start to get, thank you, eyelashes. Eyelids, thank you. Whew, it's already hitting me. Your eyelids start to get heavy and they start to kind of close like this. I'll just assume that you're praying for me, okay? And if you do that thing where the head starts to bob like this, I'll just assume that you're agreeing with me, okay? But if you start to snore, I will humiliate you, all right? So that's one of the options that's not allowed on the table, okay? All right, so let's shift gears now and talk a little bit about what the science says, about what secular research says about this particular question regarding homosexuality and transgenderism. And just out of curiosity, can anyone here tell me why it might be relevant or valuable for us to have this discussion? Why would we care what secular research says? Yeah, in the back? I'm sorry? Oh, okay, yeah. Right, because you want to know what the science says because that's the kind of conversation you might have with somebody in an apologetic setting. Yeah, absolutely. Behind you, yes? Okay, so we want to give them the most honest truth. We want to know the facts, and it could be, I'm assuming you're presuming by that statement, that there can be facts that are discovered by secular research, right? Okay, sure. Anything else comes to mind? Yes, over here. Okay, yeah, so science is a tool, if you will, to help discover truth about the world. If God is the one who created the world, right, then we would expect that any true discoveries made by science will just be true, in a sense, right? If God is the author, right, we say, well, God speaks through Scripture. We call that special revelation. God also speaks through creation. We call that general revelation. And if he's the author of both, we'd expect that what Scripture says and what is discovered by science, provided it's not hijacked for political purposes, it should discover what's true, and those two sources of revelation should correspond, and I would agree. It's also interesting to note that when you study the scientific researchers, the people who are actually doing the research, not the reports that you hear in the news or in the articles, whatever, but if you actually study the people who are doing the research, who oftentimes are gay or trans themselves, what they point out are actually truths that are consistent with what we've just learned and reject the cultural beliefs that I talked about at the very beginning. And so that's what I found to be very, very interesting. So, for example, let's just take this question. Again, I know it's not a question that currently is like the hottest topic question, but just as an example, most people in our culture believe that homosexuality is something that you're born with, that there's a genetic component to this, or that biologically speaking, someone is, born in this way and they eventually develop same-sex attraction by virtue of some biological or genetic component. What's interesting, though, is one of the reasons why people believe that is because of two Harvard University-trained scientists, Simon LeVay and Dean Hamer. Now, Simon LeVay was a brain researcher. Dean Hamer was a geneticist. Simon LeVay's research was on the brains, and he discovered that there was a difference between the brains of homosexuals and the brains of heterosexuals. And he's like, wow, see, we got evidence that there's a difference, a biological difference. Dean Hamer came out a few years later and said, actually, there's a genetic component that shows that being gay is something you're born with, right? There's a genetic component to that. And so when these guys came out with their research, they were heralded as heroes. They were interviewed on every news media outlet. At the time these guys were publishing their research, I was in physical therapy school at California State University. And I remember my physiology professor coming out with Hamer study and saying, see, look, they're born this way. If there's any Christians in my classroom here, I just want you to know you are wrong. They didn't choose this, they're born this way, kind of thing. And what's interesting, though, the way science works is, no single study or even two studies proves anything. You kind of need a preponderance of research and studies to corroborate any given hypothesis, if you will, to see if it's true. And so many researchers came after Simon LeVay and Dean Hamer to investigate the question, well, are their findings correct? Can these findings be corroborated? And what was interesting is every single research study, not every single, but many, many research studies afterwards came out and found conclusions that contradicted what Simon LeVay and Dean Hamer said. And so people started to wonder after a while, and again, these are researchers, not like, not Time Magazine or Wall Street Journal. Like the people in research were like, wait a minute, what these guys are saying has been contradicted by all these other studies. So what are we to make of that? And they asked Simon LeVay and Dean Hamer, hey, all this research contradicts your findings. What do you make of that? Here's what Simon LeVay said. Well, it's important to stress what I didn't find. I didn't prove that homosexuality is genetic or find a genetic cause for being gay. I didn't show that gay men are born that way, the most common mistake people make in interpreting my work. Nor did I locate a gay center of the brain. So he backtracked from the conclusions that most people in our society had drawn from his research. When Dean Hamer was asked, well, so is homosexuality genetic? Because you're a geneticist from Harvard University. You said that it is genetic, and now all these other studies are saying it's not genetic. What do you make of that? Here was his answer. Absolutely not. He says, from twin studies, we know that half or more of the variability in sexual orientation is not inherited. It's not genetic. It's inherited. In fact, he went on to say, the best recent studies suggest that female sexual identification is more a matter of the environment than it is of heredity. Now, do you think these statements made the press, got put on CNN, got put in the Washington? Like, no, of course not, right? Because they're just speaking kind of in their scholarly capacities and whatever, and all these people are doing research saying, no, there's no evidence that you're born this way. Now, what was the research that caused these people to say what they just said? Well, it's mentioned right here, twin studies. Is anyone here an identical twin? Has anyone ever met an identical twin? Raise your hand. Oh, looks like everybody has. Okay. What do identical twins share besides looks? Genetics, that's right. And so identical twins provide a very interesting test case, and that is this. If you want to know whether a characteristic is genetic or not, you could look at identical twins. And if one twin has a characteristic, let's say brown hair, then the co-twin, like the twin's brother or whatever, is also likely to have brown hair. What percentage of the time do you think that's going to happen? Like 99% of the time? Right? 100%, right? Perhaps, yeah. And this percentage is called a concordance rate. The concordance rate for hair color amongst male identical twins is like almost 100%, right? Every time you have one twin brother who's got brown hair, the other twin brother is also going to have brown hair, almost 100% of the time. So they said, this is interesting. Let's try this with homosexuality. Let's take identical twin brothers and compare them and say, every time you have one identical twin brother who is homosexual, what's the percentage that the other twin brother would also be homosexual? Now, if homosexuality is genetic, like eye color, hair color, what would you expect the concordance rate to be? 100, 90%, 99, something high, right? Well, they took these studies, they did an Australian twin registry. So they looked at 25,000 sets of twins. Okay, not a small sample size, 25,000 sets of twins. And here's what they discovered. The concordance rate for same-sex attraction in male identical twins was only 11%. This was the death knell to the idea that homosexuality is something that you're born with. And I can't show you 25,000 sets of twins, but here's just a sampling of it. So these two pairs every pair of blocks represents two male brothers, twin brothers, okay? If the block is colored red, that means that twin brother has same-sex attraction, right? So notice in this case, the co-twin does not have same-sex attraction because both blocks are not red. In most instances, that was the case. Only occasionally were both twins both homosexual. And so when they did this study, and it was corroborated with 7 additional twin studies done all around the world, every time the concordance rate was something like 11, 12, 15%. It was never like 99 or 100%. And this is what led people to say, okay, this is crazy. You can't, how can we say you're born this way, right? Jason Collins was a basketball player for the Brooklyn Nets. He was the first NBA player to come out and say, I'm gay, while still playing in the NBA. In fact, President Obama gave him personally a phone call to congratulate him, because I guess if you're gay and you're in the NBA, you get a call from the president, right? And he was on Sports Illustrated, stories everywhere. Everybody's all excited and cheering what a hero this guy is. What many people didn't realize is that Jason Collins has an identical twin brother named Jaron Collins, who, guess what, is not gay. In fact, he went on the Jimmy Kimmel TV show, and Jimmy Kimmel gave him this shirt, I'm the straight one, So that when he's walking around town and some guy tries to hit on him, he's like, no, that's my brother. Like, I'm the straight one, Well, you'd expect if homosexuality is genetic that you'd expect twin brothers to always both be gay or not, but that's not the case. And there was, even a recent study, the largest study even done recently, just a few years back, was this one done in the journal called Science, which is a well-known, prestigious medical journal. This is not Christian. Sample size of 477,000 individuals. Again, probably the largest study ever done on looking at genetic indications for same-sex behavior, and they said the results did not allow any meaningful prediction of an individual's sexual behavior. Yes, they found markers, but they're like, this is not predictive in any way. So again, when you look at the researchers, they're saying it's not the case that you're born this way. Dr. Martin Duberman, founder for the Center for Gay and Lesbian Studies in New York, he himself identifies as a gay man. He says there's no good scientific work that establishes that people are born gay or straight. Camila Paglia, who is a lesbian and a feminist, she's not on our side. In her book, Vamps and Tramps, great title for a book, she said, look, our sexual bodies were designed for reproduction. Who knew, right? No one is born gay. The idea is ridiculous. Homosexuality is an adaptation, not an inborn trait. Dr. Lisa Diamond, who is a researcher for the American Psychological Association, which is like the de facto organization for psychology in America today, not Christian organization, of course. She herself is a lesbian. She herself has helped to edit the handbook on psychology and sexuality, right? She's not just some random researcher in the APA. And she's a lesbian activist. And in a lecture to Columbia University, she said this: I feel as a community, we queers have to stop saying, please help us, we're born this way, and we can't change, as an argument for legal standing. She says, I don't think we need that argument, and that argument's going to bite us in the 3-letter word, begins with A, refers to your backside, because now we know that there's enough data out there, and the other side is aware of it as much as we are aware of it. In fact, her whole research PhD work was on sexual fluidity, on how sexual attractions change over time. So she vigorously rejects this idea that you're born this way and can't change. Now, why is it that all the people who are doing the research on sexual orientation, on whether you're born gay or straight or whatever, who are gay themselves, gay and lesbian themselves, are saying you're not born that way, and yet virtually everybody in our culture believes the opposite? Well, don't people care about science? Don't people care about research, right? Well, they do when it fits their narrative, but this doesn't fit the narrative. So what everybody believes today is you're born that way, even though, these people who are gay and lesbian themselves are saying you're not, and they're the ones doing the research. So anyways, not that if we found a gay gene that would change anything, because, you could be born a whole bunch of different ways, right? But not even these researchers believe that if you were born gay, that would make it moral. Because the question, and one of the reasons why a lot of researchers abandon the born gay kind of hypothesis, because they realize this. If it turns out that there's some sort of genetic reason why you're born gay, it could be an abnormal genetic cause. Right? I mean, there's lots of genetic conditions that are just clearly abnormal. So what are we going to say? Homosexuality is an abnormal genetic variance, right? So they realized this is a bad line of thinking, and they rejected it. But everybody in our culture thinks that's true. Okay, well, what does the science say about transgenderism? Again, I would suggest to you that when you look at the researchers who are doing the science, they would argue quite contrary to what virtually everybody believes in our culture. For example, we know that scientific research teaches that humans come in only two sexes, male and female. In other words, it is a sexual binary, which is that phrase that's a swear word in modern LGBT circles. But for as long as we have known about the question of sex in human history, we've always known that there's just two sexes. And with the exception of a very vocal minority, and only in the last decade, the vast majority of researchers and scientists who study this question know there's only two sexes. And here's why they know there's only two sexes. It is because there are only two possible gametes. Now, what's a gamete? A gamete is simply a reproductive cell. So a sperm is a gamete, that's a reproductive cell, and an egg, or ovum, is a gamete, that is also a reproductive cell. Turns out, there are only two possible gametes that exist in humans, either sperm or egg. There's no other possible gamete that can exist. That is why we know that sex is binary and that there are only two sexes. If there were a third type of gamete possible, maybe we could say there's three types of sexes, but there are not three possible gametes. There's only two, which is why scientists have always classified human beings as being just a sexual binary. And every person that exists today in the world, whether gay, straight, cis, trans, non-binary, whatever, was created by the union of those two gametes, sperm and egg. There's no other possible arrangement of gametes that can create human beings. Okay? No more, no less, just sperm and egg. And just because somebody is born with an inability to produce either sperm or egg does not mean that we throw out the entire classification system. Right? Just because somebody can't produce sperm, there's some sort of biological anomaly, just means that they have a biological or physiological anomaly. Right? Humans, for example, are bipedal, which means we walk on two legs. But if somebody is born without a leg or loses a leg in an accident, do we say now they're unipedal or there's a spectrum of pedals? Like, no. Humans are still bipedal, even though some people might be born without a leg. Right? Now, so this is why scientists have known that sex is binary, is only male and female, because there's only two possible gametes that can be possibly produced. Now, one of the reasons, or one thing that this is related to is the answer to a very popular question that's come out in the last couple of years, and that is, what is a woman? And many of you might recognize this image here. This comes from a documentary that was created by this guy named Matt Walsh, who was like a conservative sort of political commentator. It's part of an organization called the Daily Wire. And I hadn't seen the film for a while until finally somebody's like, oh, you got to see this, is very interesting. This guy goes around asking scientists, especially gender science activists, if they can define a woman. And what's interesting about the film is that all these people who are performing these, gender surgeries and cross-sex surgery and doing cross-sex hormones, it seemed like nobody in the film could answer this very basic question, what is a woman? And many of the answers they gave were circular answers, which means they used the word or the term woman in their definition. So he would say, well, what is a woman? And they would say, anyone who defines himself as a woman is a woman. Or anyone who believes himself to be a woman is a woman. He's like, well, what is it that they believe themselves to be? That thing. You can't use the word woman, It's like saying, what's nuclear energy? And you're like, well, it's energy derived from nuclear sources. Well, that's not helpful, right? Because you're just using the same words in the thing. And so anyways, there was a whole bunch of bad answers that were just unscientific or just circular, until finally at the end of the film, Matt Walsh approaches his wife in the kitchen and says, hey, honey, do you know what a woman is? And she answers, well, a woman is an adult human female. And shortly after the film ends. So it's kind of like, oh, cute, like she gave this answer. Now, in a sense, I would say, yeah, that's true. A woman is an adult human female. But of course, modern gender theory advocates aren't content with just leaving this alone, because they're going to say, well, what do you mean by female, you know? And so a lot of people want to say, well, a female is somebody who's got XX chromosomes, and a man is a person who's got XY chromosomes. And generally that's true, except there's a lot of instances where, no, men aren't XY chromosomes. Sometimes it's, XXY or XYY, and there's a whole bunch of variations, and so this raises some ambiguity about this. So people like to poke holes in this definition. So I had come up with this other definition that I thought is less impervious to these attacks. And so I developed my own definition. The problem with my definition, although it's, is it more impervious or less impervious? More impervious. It's more resistant to attacks. I was like, am I using that term wrong? Impervious. Yeah. Anyways, the problem with my definition is that it's not as eloquent and easy to remember. This is like flows off the tongue. It's only just a few words, But, when it comes to, being precise, sometimes, you have to lose brevity and pithiness. So here's my definition of a woman that I think doesn't fall prey to some of the attacks. So I define a woman as this: an adult human whose body is organized around two related functions. Okay, which two related functions is a woman's body organized around? Number one, the production, storage, and delivery of eggs. And two, the gestation of another human being. So a woman is simply an adult human whose body is organized around those two functions: the production, storage, and delivery of eggs, and the gestation of a human being. And so notice I say a woman whose body is organized around, meaning in general her body is organized around that. So just because a woman might not have an ovary, or maybe her, we can be frank here with language, is that correct? So if her vagina or parts around her vagina look different than a typical female, then that's not a problem, because this definition doesn't say it's just limited to what her, what she looks like between her legs. Rather, it's about how her body is generally organized around the production, storage, and delivery of eggs and the gestation of another human being. And so likewise, to follow the similar fashion, a man then is simply an adult human whose body is organized around the production, storage, and delivery of sperm. So I think these definitions provide a little bit more robust than a woman is an adult human female, which again, it's true, but in order to hold off some of the attacks in terms of definitions, that's the definitions that I use for what it's worth. Take it or leave it. Now, a lot of people say, okay, but what about people who are born intersex? And intersex is a term that's being currently used in lieu of an older term called hermaphrodite. So many years ago, people said, well, people are born hermaphrodite. And hermaphrodite is no longer used to describe people with various biological or physiological differences. A hermaphrodite, technically speaking, is a person who is born with both male and female reproductive organs, where both sets are working in one individual. That never happens in humans. There are some animals that hermaphroditism happens, but not in humans. It never happens. So the term hermaphrodite was done away with many years ago, and now this new term, intersex, is being used. And intersex is just an umbrella term to refer to people who are born with differences in their either genetics, like their chromosomes, or their sexual organs. Okay? And a lot of people look at these people and say, see, this is evidence that sex is not binary. There's male and there's female, but there's a whole bunch of things in between as well. Sex is on a spectrum, right? But again, scientists say, no, this is a misunderstanding of what it means to be intersex, okay? Yes, some males are born with intersex conditions where maybe their testicles or the penis doesn't look the same as the average person. And some women are born intersex and their genitals or their sexual anatomy also doesn't look like typically every other woman. But these represent variations within the female or the male. They don't represent a third sex or indicate that there's a spectrum of sexes. They are variations within the binary, not additional sexes. Now, according to Interact is a pro-transgender organization. They're not Christian. They talk about how some children are born, and when they're born, it's not immediately evident whether that child is either male or female because of whatever developmental anomaly. Now, according to their data, this only occurs in 0.05% of births. This is an extreme minority. And even in those situations where it's not immediately evident, is this a boy or a girl? They call in a specialist, and the specialist can run a genetic test or do an ultrasound to see what organs are present inside the child and say, oh, okay, it's a boy, or oh, it's a girl. Again, we don't have to wonder, like, oh, this person's in between, they could choose their own sex. That's not the case. That is unscientific. No, every child is either born male or female, and they might have anomalies, they might have variations within some of their characteristics, but they still represent either a male or a female. Or they're variations within the male or the female. There's some people who are born with 3 copies of chromosome number 21. And you're not supposed to be born with 3 copies of chromosome number 21. You're supposed to be born 2. And these people, it's called trisomy 21, or a lot of people refer to it as Down syndrome. And just we recognize, well, it's just a disorder, right? They don't represent a third or an additional type of species. No, they're still human, but it's a variation within the human species, right? They just have an extra copy of chromosome number 21. Are they made in God's image? Yes. Are they valuable human beings? Absolutely. Should we treat them with love and respect and compassion? Of course. People who are born intersex, are they made in God's image? Yes. Are they valuable human beings? Of course. Should we treat them with love, respect, and compassion? Absolutely. Right? And by the way, a lot of people who are intersex reject the fact that the transgender community wants to use their stories as evidence for this third sex or spectrum of sexes. So they don't actually take kindly to the suggestion that somehow they are proof of the rejection of the sex binary. So intersex is not a third sex. It's not a third gender. There's no spectrum of sexes. All right, what about the term transgender specifically? Well, according to scientific research, what they say is transgender refers to a person whose gender identity does not match their biological sex. And so gender identity, remember I said, is a self-perception about whether you're a man, a woman, neither, both, something else, whatever it might be. Okay? So in this example, however, I've given, say, a person who's born biologically male, and they might have a self-perception, their gender identity might be a woman, or vice versa. A woman born biologically female might perceive herself to be a man. Now, I just want you to just pause for a moment. Can you just imagine being a person who's biologically male but believes himself to be a woman? They might say, I feel like a woman trapped in a man's body. Now, I just want you to just for a moment consider, if you really felt that, if you really believe that, that would be incredibly distressing, wouldn't it? That would rock your world. And this is why it's estimated about 41% of people who identify as transgender attempt to commit suicide. These people are psychologically distressed and are hurting inside. This is why I say they desperately need our compassion. Now, unfortunately, and by the way, 41% attempt to commit suicide. That's compared to, I think it's like 1.6% of the general population attempts to commit suicide. So 1.6 of the general population versus 41% of transgender people. That's a high rate of attempting suicide. Now, unfortunately, what we are being told is the solution to somebody who experiences a difference in their biology from their gender identity. So instead of saying, I'm a man biologically, and I believe I'm a man, they say, well, biologically I'm a man, but I identify as a woman. So their biology and gender identity are at odds with one another. There's an incongruence. And when you have that incongruence and you're distressed by that, which I can imagine you would be, they call this gender dysphoria. So dysphoria is the term used to describe someone who experiences distress about this incongruence with their biology and their gender identity. Now, WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, is the organization that is trying to direct how the world and the United States treats people who experience gender dysphoria. And this is taken from their 2022, which is just a couple years old. I think it's the most recent version 8, their standards of care. And here's how they want to suggest solving this dysphoria. First, social transitioning, meaning encourage this person who experiences this incongruence. Say, okay, well, first change your name to, say if it's a biological male who identifies as a woman, change your name to a female's name, change your pronouns, socially transition. Soon after that, they're going to have them go through hormonal transition, which means if you're a man, we're going to put you on a cross-sex hormone, like estrogen. Or if you're a woman, we'll put you on testosterone and other kinds of drugs. Now, if you haven't yet reached puberty, they're going to want to put you on puberty-blocking hormones, meaning they're going to try to prevent puberty from taking place so that the child has enough time to think for themselves and decide for themselves, I want to be a boy or a girl. And by the way, I think it's like the percentage of children who are put on puberty blockers that eventually get cross-sex hormones is like in the 90s, 90% or higher. It's really high. So most kids who have their puberty blocked eventually decide, or it's decided for them, that they're going to get cross-sex hormones and be encouraged to transition to something of the opposite sex. And then the third stage is surgical transition, which they refer to as gender-affirming care or gender confirmation surgery, which, let's just be real, this is a euphemism for amputating healthy sex organs. It's literally what it is. Now, I know we're going to probably get to this in the Q&A because this is the number one question I'm asked is about pronouns, right? Should we use people's pronouns? One of the reasons why I think it's wrong to go along with a person's preferred pronouns is because you are collaborating in the first stage of transitioning. And I don't want to collaborate in a process that's going to lead a person down towards surgical transition. And so one reason, among many, of my opposition to using a person's preferred pronouns is I don't want to participate in this first step that's going to eventually help encourage them, lead them towards the second and third step. So again, you have a biological male. Instead of identifying as a man, they identify as a woman. Historically, we said, go to counseling and get your gender identity, get your mind to match up with your body. But today we're saying, no, change your body to make it match up with your perception, right? And this is why, most famously, Bruce Jenner, Olympic gold medalist, eventually decided he is a woman and became Caitlyn Jenner, right? Or as I mentioned, Ellen Page now wants to be called Elliot Page. Both of them had gender-affirming care done to them. Now, there's many problems with this solution, with changing your body to make it match your gender identity instead of changing your gender identity to make it match your body. Many problems. Let me just mention 5 quickly here. First of all, you could be mistaken about your gender identity, but you can't be mistaken about your biology, right? So why go through a process that will cause lifelong, permanent decisions that are life-altering and deleterious, dangerous and damaging, based on something that you could be mistaken about, right? Because remember, gender identity is a psychological belief about whether you're a man or woman or something else. But according to Harvard University and all this research on this, your gender identity can fluctuate over time. Demi Lovato went from straight to non-binary to feminine, in just 4 or 5 years, right? And this happens all the time. But it's hard to imagine you'd be mistaken about your biology. You just look and be like, oh, I'm a guy or I'm a girl. And even in those cases where they're intersex, they're either a guy or a girl, but just have some variations, right? So it seems strange to make life-altering permanent decisions to your body, like amputation of certain body parts, based on something that you could be mistaken about or change your mind about. Second of all, your sex is unchangeable, right? Sex is a biological trait that is immutable, right? Think about it. If a person who's 70 years old gets plastic surgery done to their face to make them look 50, has that changed their actual age? No, because age is a biological reality that is unchangeable. Well, in the same way, if a person gets plastic surgery done to their sexual anatomy to make their sexual anatomy look like the opposite sex, does that change your sex? No, because sex is a biological reality that is unchangeable, like age. In fact, every cell in your body, you have trillions of cells in your body, and they are all stamped with XX or XY, and nothing is going to change that chromosomal makeup by some plastic surgery. Problem number 3, sex reassignment surgery or gender confirmation surgery or gender confirming care, however you want to call it, entails cutting off perfectly healthy sex organs. Some transgender advocates try to say, well, it's just like, look, if you get corrective lenses, spectacles for your eyes because your eye vision is bad, or you have a cleft palate, or you have bad teeth and you get them changed, and it's just like that. We're just correcting mistaken things. This is not at all like that. When you correct someone's vision or cleft palate, or they're given braces, you're restoring the organ or the tissue back to its original design. That's not what gender confirming care does. It amputates perfectly healthy sex organs, breasts, penis, other parts of your body. It takes out your uterus, your ovaries. And I can't tell you the horrific things that you will see on social media. I've seen women come out of a surgery with holding a mason jar full of a clear fluid, and they get on TikTok, they get on Instagram, they look at this. It's my uterus. Isn't this cool? And they're just think it's like some cute trend they're just engaged in. They just had the uterus removed. It's unbelievable how, this is completely from the enemy. It has convinced a whole generation, especially of girls, that it's the right thing to literally have perfectly healthy sex organs being removed from your body. Gender dysphoria, fourth problem, gender dysphoria is often unresolved by this surgery. In other words, they think, well, okay, if you take your body to make it match your gender identity, then you'll have congruence, and then you won't have any dysphoria. The problem is that a lot of research shows they don't have their dysphoria resolved. And part of the problem is that oftentimes their dysphoria is not because there's a mismatch. It's because there are other, what they call comorbidities. They have other psychological problems. They might have autism. They might have other mental illness. And these things are overlooked, never diagnosed, because as soon as you come in and say, I have dysphoria, gender dysphoria, I might be trans, they put you on that path, social, hormonal, surgical transition. And they oftentimes will overlook or ignore and not diagnose other mental health issues. And so when they go and they have their body all chopped up and they still experience dysphoria, they're surprised. Why is that? Well, it's because they have some other underlying mental illness that was never addressed. Now, don't get me wrong. You'll have people cite you every study in the book. Hey, look at this research study, This is in the American Journal of Psychiatry. Well-established, prestigious journal. It showed that, when these trans people get gender-confirming care, they have less suicidality. They're not as suicidal anymore. And don't we want to save people's lives, right? These studies come out all the time. The problem is that, and I don't mean to be pessimistic here, but the academy has lost so much credibility because these journals now are only publishing things that fit narratives, not really in search for truth anymore. And we know this is the case because these things come out, and with just a little bit of modest scrutiny and investigation into these studies, they realize they're totally flawed and misleading. In fact, this was the same case with this. This study, which was heralded as proof that it'll reduce suicidality in trans people, people did some research into it and said, oh, no, that's not what it says. And they gave pushback to the journal, and the journal had to issue a retraction. And they said, they had to literally say, okay, sorry, this is not true. The results are the opposite. The results demonstrated no advantage of surgery in relation to subsequent mood or anxiety disorders. So suicidality wasn't increased. They just said it was, but it wasn't. And they had to issue a retraction. Anyways, so this is the problem, is that there's like a snowball effect of these people who believe this thing and then produce journal articles that support their narrative, and people more and more people end up believing that. So it just becomes this snowball effect of people believing falsity. And then finally, I'll mention that the transgender ideation often resolves itself. In other words, if you do nothing to a kid who says, I'm a boy, but I think I'm a girl, if you don't affirm that, but just don't do anything, that child, by the time they reach young adulthood, will be like, yeah, I don't know what I was talking about. I'm not a girl. I'm a guy. So I just was confused. I don't know why. This is crazy. So again, this is coming from I don't want to say the other side, but the research studies, right? So the American Psychological Association and the American Psychiatric Association, both of which are non-Christian secular research organizations, the biggest ones in America, they are pro-gay, they are pro-trans, and both of them say, look, transgender identity fluctuates, and approximately 70 to 75% of gender dysphoric minors eventually accept their chromosomal sex. So if your little boy says, I think I'm a girl, if you do nothing, not even take them to counseling, by the time they reach their 20s, they'll be, no, I am a boy. I don't know what I was thinking. I was just confused. That's the majority of them. Again, this is what secular research says. Camille Paglia, again, lesbian researcher, not a friend to Christianity, when she was asked about how a lot of adults, specifically parents, are collaborating with their children to go through gender-confirming care, she says anyone who collaborates in an intrusion into a developing child's body and mind is guilty of child abuse, a crime against humanity. It's remarkable how many atheists, gays, lesbians, evolutionists are all against transgender ideology. Richard Dawkins, like the most notorious atheist in the world, is like, what has happened to society? We've lost our minds. Now, Richard Dawkins is no friend to Christianity. He hates Christianity. He hates Yahweh. He said it. But he's like, this is not scientific, what is being propagated in our culture. Like, we've lost our minds. I mean, most of the people who are against this that I follow are atheists and evolutionists. And it's because they're like, this is not scientific. This flies in the face of everything they know evolutionarily speaking. This flies in the face of modern science. It's remarkable. Peter Boghossian, atheist philosopher, also just said, he had to quit his job at Portland State University. He's an atheist. He's like, because I couldn't even question this. Because all the universities care about today is a narrative. And if you don't follow the narrative, you're out. So, anyways, I'm going to stop there. We're going to take a break. And after the break, what I want to do is, now that we know what Scripture and secular research says about this, I want to give you some practical principles that will help you to navigate your conversations and your relationships that you might have with friends or family that identifies gay, lesbian, transgender, non-binary, okay? So be sure to come back for that, and then we're going to do some Q&A right after that. So hopefully this will give you some practical handholds for you to be able to work with in terms of real situations that you're having.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Let's give Alan a hand.